Well, 27 COPs later, let's turn to the data again and see how well they're doing. Back in 1995, the estimated total emissions worldwide tipped the scales at 33.5 billion tonnes. Fast forward to 2019, the year before the COVID pandemic, and the global emissions total has risen to 50 billion tonnes. Our viewers with keen eyesight might be able to see a little blue bit at the bottom. Well, that's Australia's contribution to the global total, and it's barely changed over that time, despite our rising population and rising economic output. On the next slide, we can see that all the heavy lifting in greenhouse gas production is being done by China. It produces more than 12 billion tonnes, about a quarter of the world's entire emission total. So despite all the hot air that's come out of 27 COPs, global emissions have risen by roughly 2/3 since the COP show began. On any reasonable assessment, the COP process has been a complete and utter failure, which is exactly what you'd expect since it's being run by the United Nations, which has a record of doing a few things moderately well and a lot of things rather badly. If the UN Secretary-General was facing a popular election anytime soon, you'd think he'd be worried about his appalling record on climate change. It might haunt him. But Antonio Guterres, the UN's bureaucratic-in-chief, doesn't have to face the people's verdict, leaving him free to go to Egypt and say stuff like that. Guterres is then a failed socialist politician, and he gets to lecture successful countries like Australia about what we should be doing to combat climate change. Back in March, he ticked us off for not shifting away from hydrocarbons, fossil fuel as he calls it, fast enough. He told us we'd made what he called a stupid decision about investment and labelled us a holdout. The proven path to reduce emissions, he said, was by shifting to wind, solar and batteries. That's utter nonsense, of course. As Mark Mills told me on this show recently, in every country that's invested heavily in intermittent renewable energy, power prices have gone up, while reliability and resilience have gone down. The science is in on that one, Mr. Guterres. It's physically impossible to shift from a carbon-neutral economy by that route. Right now, the only possible technical solution, as far as I can see, is nuclear power. Unfortunately, nuclear technology is fast improving. Small modular reactors are our best hope right now. Clean, efficient, low waste, and 100% reliable, plus 0% emissions. Guterres, however, has nothing to say about nuclear power. Back in 1995, when he was elected as Prime Minister of Portugal, there were plans to build a nuclear power station in his country. But one of Guterres' first acts as PM was to scrap it. Portugal's record on reducing emissions is nothing to write home about, by the way. Big investments in wind and hydropower, but 75% of Portugal's energy comes from imported hydrocarbons. In fact, Portugal's emissions since 2014 have increased by 13%, while Australia's have gone down. So, allow me to offer some advice to Guterres in his native tongue. Quem telhados de vidro não atira pedras, which means people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.